Hello dear Anno-holics, and I gotta say, it's just one more month and then Anno ends up on your drives, if you're obviously looking forward to this game. The odds are good, after all, there's very little to complain about given the numerous pre-release versions and the still available demo. In fact, the dominant feeling is that you probably know Anno 117 really well already. There was a lot said about it online, you could check the demo I mentioned yourself, but there was one thing that Ubisoft kept close to its chest, well, up until now. We were finally allowed to play the first hours of the Anno 117 campaign, and this means we can now give you a better assessment of whether story fans will get their money's worth out of this game. But that's not all. The developers have actually changed more in the game since the demo than we expected and have presented a new feature that gives us a slight cause for concern. So everyone on board and cast off, we had a lot to discuss in this final preview of Anno 117. Let's talk about the campaign first. A few details were already known beforehand. In Anno 117, before starting the campaign, you don't just choose a portrait and a coat of arms like in Anno 1800, only to never see your character again afterwards. Instead, you choose either Marcus as your governor or his sister Marcia. But beware, this decision has consequences. Even in the first playable part of the campaign for this preview, the story took a slightly different course depending on the choice, and one of the two is, in my opinion, the significantly more intriguing one, at least in the beginning. But let's start with Marcia and Marcus themselves. Both are the children of a Roman governor in Egypt and they grew up there, yet neither was destined for a particularly glorious future. While Marcus, as the ninth son, was probably sometimes forgotten even at dinner and spent more time in the city's alleyways than in class, Marcia could never fully thrive as a woman in Roman society. Early in the story, she's even to be married to a much older man, the governor of Latium, the first of the two playable provinces in this game. What they have in common is that, in the eyes of the public, they are actually unfit to be governor. This doesn't change whether you start as Marcus or Marcia. The very broad course of the story also remains the same in both cases. Of course, we won't spoil anything here, but we can say a few more words about the circumstances in Latium. The land is beautiful and essentially the gateway to the Roman heartland, but a volcanic eruption has caused devastation here and destroyed the great city of Ambrosia. Now, as the new governor, or his wife respectively, we're supposed to rebuild the city in honor of the aging Emperor Lucius. He wants to bring his wife, Juliana, to the throne, but faces opposition from Rome. Your player character is left on an empty island full of ruins and is simply told to get started under the direction of the Emperor's slave, Ben Balian. Well, maybe more under his guidance. The whole thing functions well as a tutorial, although you also receive the same help prompts if you opt directly for the Endless game. However, the campaign guides you a little more along a certain path and holds back some possibilities, such as settling new islands, for the time being at least. But it also doesn't cut off the entirely new optional paths in Anno 117. The most important novelty of Anno 117 is, after all, the player freedom in many areas. For instance, which resources you want to use to reach the next population tier, which gods you worship, and which technologies you research first. The campaign doesn't impose restrictions here, and you can manage and govern freely, which, however, takes a bit of time to get accustomed to. After all, in a game as complex as Anno, you don't want to make reckless mistakes, although there are certainly no clearly wrong answers in any case. So the campaign itself places great value on freedom of choice. While you shouldn't expect far-reaching consequences, there are a few smaller options here and there with corresponding deviations from a single path. This starts with whether you want to take a few sardines as a gift when visiting the Emperor, and this can extend to whether you ensure the Empress's daughter appears for her birthday or prefers to hang out somewhere else. The team has clearly learned from the stories in the Anno 1800 DLCs, especially from Land of Lions, where they already experimented with more choices and alternative routes. The main story of Anno 1800 was still strictly linear, now the whole thing feels much more interactive. And this also brings a drawback. Not every story progression seems equally high quality in terms of narrative. The choice of whether you want to play as Marcus or Marcia is very crucial here. As mentioned, I don't yet know what happens later, but in the first part of the story, Marcia turns out to be far more interesting character. The entire hook of the story makes much more sense from her perspective, and she even gets a bit more to do. Furthermore, Marcia comes across as the cleverer character in dialogues, someone who is truly underestimated only because of societal prejudices. Marcus, by comparison, seems well, naive and sometimes a bit elitist. No real obstacles are placed in his way, people just think he's a little gullible, and he probably sometimes thinks so himself. Marcia, on the other hand, is drawn into a genuine conspiracy. Secrets, intrigues, and family drama, this all comes out much better here. Marcus's story will have to catch up significantly in the later course to be on par with his sister's story. Anno 117 also steps up its presentation compared to Anno 1800. During dialogues, there are a few atmospheric artworks in the background, which can even vary depending on the course of the story and the chosen character. Nothing earth-shattering, but quite charming overall. That's also how I would describe the actual quests. Of course, the campaign is primarily about following the endlessly motivating Anno loop and dedicating one's life to the god of efficiency, and here this routine is broken up by small tasks such as those seen in many previous Anno titles. In the first hours of gameplay, story missions mostly consist of shipping resources to the Emperor or visiting various ports. I was not forced into violent conflict, neither at sea nor on land, in the first 3 hours of the gameplay at least, but you know, I still built the wall, just to be safe. In any case, it will be interesting to see whether the story makes use of the new possibilities with land units later on, and whether that remains optional or not. Land battles are not entirely uncontroversial within the Anno community, just like warfare itself. Some don't want to play without it, while other people's eyes start to twitch just at the thought of equipping a ship with a ballista. Since Ubisoft is trying to fully cater to all their fans in Anno 117 more than ever before, I can well imagine that there will be a way around major battles in the campaign. The question is whether the story will then still unfold sufficient drama. The first 3 hours at least suggest this, as I was well entertained even without any combat. Now, in addition to a look at the story campaign, there are a few more new details that might interest you, especially if you played the demo. Ubisoft has made improvements compared to the Gamescom demo, and even did some big things. The most important one concerns the radius of influence of public buildings, such as the tavern, Grammaticus, or a theater. Instead of being dependent on the road network, as in Anno 1800, their area of influence in the demo was still dependent on a radius, more like Anno 1404. Not everyone liked the return to the past, as the system seemed somewhat unauthentic overall. After all, it's much more important to the residents of a city how long the path is, not the distance the crow flies to the nearest pub. This was also the case in Anno 1800. Now the developers in Mainz have revised the system again and returned from the radius system to the street reach. Only the side effects of production buildings, for example that a bakery increases income and also risk of fire, are still spread through a radius. This affects the entire way cities are built and leads to layouts that are a little more reminiscent of Anno 1800, as the road network is now more important again. The second major point of criticism from the demo concerned the interface. A few things have changed here too. While the nested menus remain, I still believe that you get used to them after a few hours and find all the buildings quickly enough. However, the design of the menu has been rethought, even if only in detail, but these details make quite a difference in my opinion. Instead of feeling cold and thematically inappropriate, the menu now looks a little more playful. A few golden accents and a marble texture have made a big impact here. And finally, there's one more piece of news. While playing, I noticed a completely new feature that seems interesting, but also contains a tiny factor for concern. Anno 117 now has a battle pass? Wait, put the spears away for a moment. Anno 117 has a feature called the Hall of Fame, which feels a bit like a battle pass. You have these reward tiers for each region, which you can unlock bit by bit, and where you get cross-game advantages. That is, content you keep even if you start an endless game after the campaign, for example. The whole thing is called the Hall of Fame, and you can unlock the rewards with fame points. If you've invested enough points in one tier, you unlock the next until you have everything. And yes, I was immediately skeptical, and I still am. The system smells like potential post-release monetization, but in the preview version, I could only unlock everything through playing, and there were no indication of an in-game store. I earned fame points by completing challenges, which happens almost incidentally, for example by completing story missions, or even for your advisor pointing out 9 times that you should take a break. The Hall of Fame bonuses include not only purely cosmetic content, such as some genuinely noble ornaments, but also gameplay advantages. These include powerful specialists, additional starting resources, or even technologies that are unlocked from the beginning. If you want, you can even use fame points to ensure that all the gods of the Pantheon are unlocked in every new game. You even have the bonuses in multiplayer, although you can optionally deactivate the Hall of Fame entirely in a match. At the moment, the Hall of Fame is therefore more of a tool for the developers to enable account-wide progress. Whether real money will play a role there eventually, and whether it will actually become a battle pass, remains to be seen. So in general, things remain exciting 1 month before release, the signs continue to be very good, and the current version was able to completely captivate me again, even aside from the campaign. I simply can't get away from this game, and that shows me that Ubisoft Mains is once again doing things right. The story itself is also quite promising, but after Anno 1800, it's better not to give any final thoughts before seeing the ending, and it's up to you whether the changes introduced after the demo feedback are more to your liking. Just a final word, everything up until now was written by my GameStar colleague Fabiano, who is a veteran of the series, but let me add this from a perspective of a more casual Anno player. If you ever thought about getting into this series but it felt a bit overwhelming, I think this is actually not a bad moment to give this game a try. Going through the first part of the game is pretty straightforward, the interface is clear and welcoming even if you have just a bit of experience with city builders or strategy games, and the overall vibe of Latium is just fun. So while I might be spending a lot of time these days fighting it out with other players in Battlefield, right after that I hop into Anno 117 and just try to live the peaceful life of a Roman governor. And it is a lot of fun. Thank you for watching. Take care.